Syracuse has a ton of weapons on offense.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we're going over big picture takeaways from Syracuse's 31-28 win over Georgia Tech yesterday. We're going over the offense, the defense, and of course, we can't forget the coaching because there was some good and there was some bad, and we're going to address all of it here on today's podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Go to 5hourenergy.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Let's start off with the biggest takeaway that I had with Syracuse's offense, and that is that this team has weapons galore. And I feel like we say that every single year because Syracuse typically gets off to a hot start and everyone seems to get involved before eventually we all know what happens. But this year does feel a little bit different. And here's why. The pedigree of these players. The two Georgia transfers, Jackson Meeks, Haynes, right? LeQuint Allen's an all-ACC running back. Oronde Gadsden is an all-American tight end, and he's back this season, and he's healthy, and he looks great. And Trebor Pena has emerged for this team. 5 touchdowns now in 2 weeks. I wish I had him on my fantasy team. So when I look at the weapons, I'm like, my goodness, I don't think this is a fluke. Against Georgia Tech, 8 players had at least 1 catch. 8 of them. That's already pretty good. It gets even better. 6 players had at least 4 catches in the game. Do you understand how hard that is to do? Have 6 players on your team catch at least 4 balls. That's hard. Those 6 players were Oronde Gadsden, Trebor Pena, Umari Hatcher, LeQuint Allen, Jackson Meeks, and Haynes. All had different amounts of yards, but they all were getting involved in the offense. They were all getting some touches. 8 total pass catchers, and 6 of them had at least 4 catches. This team has a lot of weapons, and it's also helped by the fact that they have a quarterback who can get them the ball at an incredibly high level. And this is no disrespect to prior Syracuse quarterbacks. This is a compliment to Kyle McCord, who is playing right now at a Heisman Trophy level. I'm not saying he's going to win the Heisman, but through 2 weeks, he's got nearly 800 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 1 pick, and completing nearly 70% of his passes. Okay, that is Heisman caliber through 2 weeks. Whether he can sustain that, hopefully he can. But they have a quarterback who can get them the ball with on top of their pedigree. And we haven't even mentioned Justice Ross Simmons, who's still dealing with a hamstring injury. Justice Ross Simmons is a Colorado State transfer. A lot of big programs were going after him this offseason. Syracuse was fortunate enough to land him. We don't even know what his role is going to be in this offense. Because through 2 weeks, they haven't really needed him yet. Now, as we get going, our depth is probably going to get tested more. Injuries do happen, right? We're seeing that with Justice Ross Simmons. But this team just has a boatload of weapons on it. And it's really, really nice to see everyone really getting involved in the offense. It's like Syracuse runs a play and you're like, all right, who's getting the ball this time? That's enjoyable. Sometimes, yeah, predictable's cool. But it's like, ooh, who's going to get it? It's that like interesting factor. It's fun to watch. So they have a lot of weapons. That was a big picture takeaway on offense against Georgia Tech. Number 2. We don't talk about them all that much, and maybe it's for better or worse. The offensive line. There were a lot of question marks with this offensive line heading into this season. I myself wasn't really in that boat because I like the transfer tackles that they brought in, Demetrius Weatherspoon and Savion Washington, who have both played really well. And also the fact that the quarterback can just get rid of the ball quickly, and it'll mitigate the pressure on the offensive line to have to hold up for a long period of time. Well, they're 2 weeks. I'm only going to speak on Georgia Tech, but it can apply to 2 weeks. They've looked fine. I haven't really noticed all that much from the offensive line, specifically in pass protection. That's a good thing. There was not a lot of pressure from Georgia Tech in this game. They only had 1 sack, if I recall. So the offensive line has looked really good to start this season, and they were solid against Georgia Tech. I'll do a deep dive on them later on in the week. But the offensive line deserves some love because they've looked pretty good so far, keeping Kyle McCord upright and letting him get the ball to the weapons that he does have. And number 3, I talked about this guy being a sleeper on Q Sports Talk Radio. Will Nixon is a really good backup running back. Will Nixon is a 3-star Washington transfer this offseason. He is the son to offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon. Against Georgia Tech, he had 9 carries for 38 yards, and we saw at times he was being used early in drives, first, second down too. So this is not someone who is just a third down receiving back, which is what I thought his role was primarily going to be. And this is really, really good for Syracuse, and it speaks to, again, the amount of weapons that they have on offense. LeQuint Allen, I mentioned this off the top, is an all-ACC running back. Okay, he's capable of playing all 3 downs, but when you have a guy like Will Nixon who can run the ball well and can pass block well, he had a great blitz pickup in the second quarter that led to a 30-plus yard gain for Oronde Gadsden. And also, by the way, he's a converted wide receiver, so he can catch passes. You don't need LeQuint Allen always on the field. So when the time is right, sure, LeQuint Allen can be the workhorse. He's the best running back on the team. But Will Nixon can take some of the pressure off of LeQuint Allen because he is a quality backup running back. Better than I even thought he was going to be. Once again, 9 carries for 38 yards and was often used in early down situations against Georgia Tech. He was a big factor in the game plan this week. Didn't necessarily see it coming, but that was a wrinkle that I was pleasantly surprised to see. So Will Nixon is a quality backup running back for this team. So once again, the 3 main takeaways, big picture that I had against Georgia Tech. Number 1, there are so many weapons on this team. So many. 6 players with at least 4 catches in the game. That is really, really hard to replicate, but this team has a lot of depth, and Justice Ross Simmons isn't even back from injury yet. Number 2, the offensive line held up, right? They played well against Ohio. How are they going to do against a Power 4 ACC top 25 team in the country? Well, we have our answer. They look pretty good. And number 3, Will Nixon has been a pleasant surprise for this team. He is a really, really good backup running back to LeQuint Allen. When the time is right, LeQuint can be the workhorse. But for now, we got ourselves a little bit of a tandem here, and it is nice to see. So those are the offense takeaways from week 2 against Georgia Tech. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below, your main takeaways from Syracuse's offense. Now coming up, we're shifting to the other side of the ball. We're going to talk about the defense. Guys, yesterday after going to the game and before I was going to record the podcast, I was pretty tired and I needed some 5-hour energy. 5-hour energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of DIY projects to tackle at home, take a 5-hour energy shot so you can check everything off your list. If you are like me, you always have a large list of projects for the home. When you get your supplies for the project, do not forget the most essential supply, which is a 5-hour energy shot. With 0 sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon tropical burst, grape berry, and more. There is a flavor for everyone. Try them all. It's like Syracuse's offense with all the receivers and all the running backs they have. So many weapons, so many flavors. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it is delivered right to your door. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. I know the final score says 31-28 Syracuse, and that means that Syracuse obviously allowed 28 points. But don't let the final score fool you, because Syracuse's defense was much better than what that final score actually indicates. First of all, there was a significant improvement in tackling. I talked about at the end of last week how Syracuse had 19 missed tackles against Ohio, and how that is something that is so astronomically bad that I don't think they can do that again. And to their credit, we have the numbers. They did not even come close to 19 missed tackles. Shout out to Chris Carlson from Syracuse.com. He has the stat. Syracuse had 6 missed tackles the entire game against Georgia Tech. That's it. Less than a third of what they had against Ohio. So major, major improvement with the tackling. Players were taking better angles. I thought the secondary did a nice job tackling in space. I was in the stands, and the whole time I was saying, tackle, tackle, tackle on defense. And that's exactly what they were doing. Very rarely was it like, oh, that was a missed tackle. And yeah, there were some breakdowns. There were some poor angles at times. But for the most part, the tackling was significantly improved. And keep in mind, this was without all ACC linebacker Marlowe Wax, who is out for another 5 weeks, given the timetable that Fran Brown sent out last week, which was that it was a 6-week injury for him. One of their best players on defense, they didn't have him. And their tackling improved significantly. Shout out to Derek McDonald, who graded out really well against Georgia Tech. And we're going to get into another reason why the defense was significantly improved. It's going to be about Fadil Diggs. Let's talk about the run defense, all right? Syracuse allowed 250 yards against Ohio. Georgia Tech comes to the Dome, obviously top 25 team in the country, and had averaged over 200 yards on the ground through 2 weeks. One of the best running teams in the ACC, if not the country. And Syracuse held them to less than 120 on the ground. Now, why was that the case? Well, there was one major change in the lineup on defense. Fadil Diggs, the 4-star transfer from Texas A&M, 6'5", 260 pounds. He's a big dude. Well, without Marlowe Wax, we saw a number of times where Fadil Diggs would line up as a linebacker. He's normally a defensive end, but he was lining up as a linebacker. So for much of this game, Syracuse was playing a 3-3-5 defense. That means 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 players in the secondary. Those 3 linebackers, so to speak, were Fadil Diggs, Derek McDonald, who is normally a linebacker, and Justin Barron, who is the star or the rover on the defense. He can kind of do it all. That's the point. What's really important with that is they were able to replace Marlowe Wax with someone who was out of position, which meant that the backups like Anwar Sparrow and James Hurd didn't see the field as much. Able to let them develop a little bit more. Time of possession was also a big factor in this game. Syracuse held the ball for 37 minutes compared to Georgia Tech, 23 minutes. So if you're not having the ball all that much, you're going to have less plays, right? And finally, another reason why the run defense really improved is because Syracuse did something that I never mentioned on the podcast, but always either implied it or was more like, I just didn't say it, but I thought it in my head. So apologies for not saying it. They got the lead. It sounds obvious, but Syracuse went up 7-0 on the opening drive. They went up 21-7 at one point in this game. They went up 31-14 at one point in this game. Georgia Tech was consistently on their heels. They couldn't get any rhythm. They didn't have the ball all that much and were constantly trailing. So what does that mean? You can't really run the football. The efficiency wasn't good for Georgia Tech either, aside from a couple of runs, right? Like Jamal Haynes only had 3.2 yards per carry. He's the running back for Georgia Tech. Their backup, Anthony Carey, had 1 yard per carry on 5 carries. So 5 carries, 5 yards. Don't get me wrong. The run defense was really good, and the adjustment that they made with Fadil Diggs in the middle worked perfectly. At the same time, the offense was able to help them out by getting the lead, keeping the lead for the most part, and also just controlling the clock, which meant that Georgia Tech could not run the football as much. As far as the pass defense, I thought the secondary was really good up until the final 8 minutes of the game, those final 2 drives for Georgia Tech, and I am going to give the secondary a pass. You can call me optimistic or whatever you want, but here's the deal. Syracuse was playing a prevent defense. I actually turned to someone in the stands when Georgia Tech got the ball down 31-14. And I said, listen, if they go down the field and they score a touchdown, it isn't the end of the world. So long as the defense keeps everyone in front of them, there are no big plays, and therefore time comes off the clock. Now, it wasn't helped by the fact that there was a late hit out of bounds at one point. I don't know if it was really a late hit out of bounds. I kind of disagree with the call, and I can get to it later. But aside from the final 8 minutes, my point is Syracuse's secondary was solid. Georgia Tech had 266 pass yards in the game, a respectable total, but I'd wager a lot of those yards came at the very end when Syracuse was in a prevent defense. So I thought the secondary held up very well. And I mentioned off the top that the tackling with the secondary was also, for the most part, pretty good. I also want to give a shout out to the 4-star true freshman, Marcellus Barnes. It's now 2 games in a row where he is graded out by Pro Football Focus really well in coverage. So Marcellus Barnes, who I said was a pleasant surprise of training camp, he is on his way to being an all-ACC freshman, and maybe even more than that as this season keeps going. So this secondary, I think, looks pretty good, aside from the final 8 minutes of the game when they were in prevent defense. Those are the defense takeaways. The run defense was better, and the main reasoning for that, well, tackling better, right? Fadil Diggs as a linebacker worked really, really well. He had himself a great game. Fadil Diggs. Time of possession was also a factor, and also the fact that Syracuse had the lead. All those factors helped Syracuse stop the run at a much better rate than they did against Ohio. And the pass defense, I just told you, was really good up until the final 8 minutes of the game. So those are the offense and the defense takeaways, but we still got the coaching to talk about. Sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids. What do these have in common? You're probably buying a ton again this summer, but don't stress about the cost. Use Ibotta to get cash back on all your purchases when you stock up on all of your summer essentials. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. The offense looked really good against Georgia Tech. The defense looked much improved against Georgia Tech compared to Ohio. Now let's get to the coaching takeaways. And first and foremost, I hit on Fadil Diggs' switch to linebacker for this game. But shout out to defensive coordinator Elijah Robinson, who I wouldn't say was on the hot seat after last week, but people were certainly questioning him after that performance against Ohio because the defense did not look great against a MAC team, which, by the way, I mean, Notre Dame just lost at home to a MAC team, so maybe Syracuse deserves a little more credit for being Ohio, but I digress. Elijah Robinson answered the bell. The reason why I'm saying Elijah Robinson and less so Fran Brown is because Coach Fran said that it was Elijah Robinson's vision to have Fadil Diggs move to linebacker for this game. I don't know if that's going to be a switch that Syracuse will do going forward with Marlowe Wax still being injured, but it worked for this game. So shout out to Elijah Robinson for having the foresight to see what Syracuse needed to do to win this game. Oftentimes the coaches, they get stuck in their own ways. They don't want to fix anything. Well, Elijah Robinson kind of changed up the scheme for one game. And Syracuse's defense looked much better. So shout out to him for recognizing Fadil Diggs' talent, understanding that he can play linebacker, and putting his player in a position to succeed. So Elijah Robinson deserves a boatload of credit for Syracuse's defensive effort against Georgia Tech. Elijah Robinson, by the way, is the defensive coordinator for the Orange. All right. Number two, thought the discipline was better. There were 6 penalties last week against Ohio, only 5 penalties this week against Georgia Tech. So the discipline in terms of penalties, if we just want to use penalties, was better in my opinion. And I don't think really any of those penalties that Syracuse committed were quote unquote undisciplined. Last week, Syracuse had a running into the kicker, which wasn't really a running into the kicker, but they also had a late hit out of bounds, which was definitely a late hit out of bounds on Justin Barron. This week, yeah, Clarence Lewis, he did have a late hit out of bounds in the fourth quarter. I'm really not so sure that was a late hit out of bounds. I think that's a ticky-tack call. I've seen the replay of it. I think he was already going to hit him. I think it's one of those bang-bang plays. I mean, do you want a late hit out of bounds penalty? Absolutely not. But to me, that wasn't really undisciplined. I didn't see him maliciously try to do that. I think it was a bang-bang play, and Clarence Lewis just got unlucky it was called. And unlucky that it was in that spot. It was in the fourth quarter on the drive where Georgia Tech made it 31-21 with a touchdown. It was on a third down play, too. It would have been fourth down. If that is the absolute worst that Syracuse is going to commit this season or for the rest of the year in terms of being undisciplined, I'll take that. Because I don't think that was really a problem of lack of discipline on Clarence Lewis's part. I think he just got unlucky, which it happens. They're human. They're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. I didn't even really think it was much of a mistake. Whatever. Anyway, final takeaway, and this does fall on coaching a little bit. The special teams. I hit on it on yesterday's podcast, too, in the game recap. Now, Fran Brown took accountability for the onside kick debacle. If you recall, Syracuse was up by 10 points. They just let up a touchdown. I think there was around 5 minutes left in the game. Georgia Tech was down 10, so obviously they got an onside kick to get the ball back, and they recovered the onside kick. And I remember looking at the alignment and everything right before Georgia Tech was about to onside kick and thinking, something's not right here. Something's off. It just looked weird. It looked like Syracuse was a little discombobulated. They weren't lined up right, or they didn't know exactly what was going on. I didn't understand it. And then lo and behold, Georgia Tech recovers the onside kick. And Fran Brown took responsibility for it, saying that that falls on him and that he has to get his team more prepared for that situation. So I guess that's the only blemish on Fran Brown's coaching resume to date through 2 games is that he didn't have his team necessarily ready for that onside kick. Good news is it's incredibly fixable. Incredibly fixable, all right? It's not a huge deal right now. We can fix that, or this team can do that. And also, next time, if you're not sure, just call timeout before it. Syracuse was up 10 points. You don't need to save your timeouts. Just call timeout. If you're sensing that something is a little bit off with the onside kick alignment or anything, call timeout, get everyone back in, put out the correct personnel, get everyone in the right position, and then do it. And then Syracuse probably recovers that onside kick. So next time, just call the timeout. You're up by 10 points. It's not a big deal. You can use it in that situation. As far as the block punt, that can't happen. Now, fortunately, Georgia Tech did not capitalize on the block punt. It was in the late stages of the first half, and Georgia Tech ended up missing a field goal on that ensuing drive. So Syracuse went into the half up 21-14, but it could have been 21-17 or worse, 21-all because of a block punt. Could have been a big swing in points. It wasn't. Syracuse got a little lucky. The defense stiffened near the 30-yard line, forced them into a long kick. Georgia Tech misses it. But still, don't make a habit of getting your punts blocked. It doesn't usually work. And number 2, a blocked field goal. Again, that just can't happen. I can kind of give a proverbial pass on it because it looked like the defender just jumped up and it hit his hand. And I don't know what you're supposed to do other than the fact that it can't happen again. You can't have your field goals blocked. I don't care what the reasoning is. You cannot have, in a game, going forward, a missed onside kick opportunity when you're the receiving team, so there's a high likelihood that you're going to recover it, a block punt, and a block field goal, and expect to win. In fact, Syracuse really dominated this game. The only reason it was 31-28 was because of the special teams. You can shave off at least 7 points from Georgia Tech's total, if not for the special teams. So they have to be better going forward. That was like the one sour note on this game. I don't think Syracuse, and maybe this is a good thing, has played a 100% perfect game. I don't think they're ever going to be 100% perfect. But from each of these 2 wins, there's been aspects of it that have been obviously great, and there has been maybe one glaring weakness. Now, last week, it was the run defense was really bad. This week, it was, well, the special teams were not good. So going forward, they have to correct the special teams. That's all I'm going to say about that. So those are the coaching takeaways. Discipline was better. Shout out Elijah Robinson for making the switch with Fadil Diggs to linebacker, and the special teams were not exactly good. That falls a bit on the coaching staff, particularly when Fran Brown said he takes accountability for the onside kick debacle. All right, but overall, mostly positives for this win for Syracuse over Georgia Tech. And hopefully they're ranked. I don't know if they will be, but it was definitely a solid effort for this team yesterday. And they're 2-0. There's not much to complain about. So having said that, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.